from the blackest corners of your mind, they call, pulling you deep into shadow, twisting your senses, keeping you from sleep. It's time to face your darkest fears. This is Tales to Terrify. Good evening, children of the night, and welcome. We have one tale for you this week about a batch of pet sea monkeys who bring back more than just a bad attitude from their trip into space. Our story tonight comes from Frank Oreto. Frank Oreto is a writer of weird and horrific fiction living in the wilds of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His work has appeared in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Flame Tree Press, and the year's best hardcore horror. When not writing, Frank creates elaborate meals for his wife and ever-hungering children. Children of the night, join me for Frank Oreto's God Damn You to Hell, John Glenn, first published in Novus Monstrum, October 2023.
Petey burst through the front door like an 8-year-old ball of lightning. "Mom! Mom! Wait till you hear! Wait till you hear!" Suzanne looked from the stack of ungraded trigonometry tests to the Cheshire Cat wall clock. 2:30. Gerald had promised 5 p.m. She put down her red pen and tried to force all annoyance from her face. "I saw a launch. A real live rocket launch. Dad and me got it before goddamn a.m. Suzanne took her boy in her arms. "That's not appropriate language." Petey's face clouded for a moment. "It's okay between us men. Dad said so." "Well, don't say it around us moms. How was the rocket?" "So loud." Petey let loose his best rocket roar. "Oh my gosh, so loud." "And I met an astronaut." "I bet you did." Petey's father, Gerald, liked astronauts. He liked to go out to bars with them and hit on the women they drew like flies. Astronauts were one reason Gerald was Suzanne's ex-husband. "And you know what, Mom? You know what?" Gerald pushed through the front door. In his arms, he carried Petey's overnight bag along with a large glass box. "The astronaut gave me space monkeys. I gotta clear a spot. I'm clearing the spot, Dad." Petey wiggled out of his mother's embrace and raced to his room, leaving the two adults staring at each other. "Hey, Susie. I just said hi to Harry and Eugenia next door. You know, I actually kind of miss them." "You said you'd keep Petey until goddamn 5 o'clock. "Oh, come on, Suze. There's no need to—" "Don't worry. It's okay to talk that way between us men. Petey said so. The launch was pretty damned early, but he was so excited. You're pretty damned early. I plan my work around the times we agree on." "I know, I'm sorry. I have to get back to the Cape. There's a press junket thing." "Sure, I get it. Dinner, drinks. The grind never ceases." "Dad, I cleared the spot! Where are you?" Petey's excitement verged on hysteria. "Duty calls." "Wait a second, is that an aquarium?" "You can't just bring pets." But Gerald was already past her and stepping into Petey's room. Gerald worked for NASA in media relations, a job you rarely associate with the space program, but it was a job that let you give the son you only saw one weekend a month every official NASA-themed hat, t-shirt, toy, and now, space monkeys? I earn a master's in mathematics and teach 10th grade trig. He barely scrapes a BS in communications and works for the space program. The world is a stupid place. And now if I go into that bedroom and say, Petey, you can't just have a new pet without asking, I am the giant monster bitch versus his superhero rocket-launching, astronaut-befriending dad. Voices came from Petey's room. We can fill it up in the bathtub. Okay, monster bitch it is, she muttered. Suzanne was waiting when father and son came back into Petey's room, carrying the half-filled aquarium. Wait, no one asked me if you could have an aquarium in your room. Dad said it was okay, Petey said, as if this settled things. Your dad doesn't live here anymore. Her words were like a slap. Petey's excitement evaporated, replaced with barely held back tears. Monster bitch. Suzanne kneeled so she was face to face with her son. Sweetheart, I need to talk to Daddy alone for a few minutes. Go in the kitchen and have some Tang, okay? Of course, Petey looked to his father. Do what your mother says, son. The boy sniffled and walked out of the room. But space monkeys, he said in a sad, barely audible voice. Suzanne turned on her husband. You can't make decisions like this without talking to me first. Gerald put the aquarium on top of the chest of drawers Petey had cleared off, then sat down on his son's bed. He patted a spot beside him. Suzanne didn't move. Fine, I know you don't like me getting him things. Oh, screw you, Gerald. Suzanne hissed the words in a stage whisper she hoped didn't carry to the kitchen. That is so unfair. She gestured around the room. A poster of the Apollo moon landing crew hung on the wall, signed by all 3 crew members. In the corner by the closet, a 4-foot-tall Apollo 6 replica stood poised for takeoff. Yes, I don't appreciate always being the Grinch to your Santa Claus, but pets are different. Are you planning to drop off a surprise pony next time? Gerald spread his palms in a calming gesture that made Suzanne want to kick him in his khaki-covered shin. I get you. I've been trying to cut down on the presents. You know, let spending time with Petey be the present. That's why we went to the launch. Even got a look into ground control. Suzanne felt the anger fade a bit. Maybe Gerald had listened a little over their last half-dozen arguments. This whole space monkey thing wasn't my fault. It was John. You know, John Glenn. Suzanne knew John. She'd met him a few times in the last days of her marriage. So John was the astronaut Petey met? Yeah, it's really not a big deal. They'll all be dead in a month. Geez, I'm not explaining this well. You ever heard of sea monkeys? Suzanne shook her head. Wait a second. Gerald grabbed a Fantastic Four comic from a stack on Petey's nightstand and flipped through the pages. Here. He held up a full-page advertisement showing a family of pink cartoon fish people, complete with webbed hands and stubby antennae. Above them, the ad proclaimed, Enter the wonderful world of amazing live sea monkeys. Own a bowl full of happiness. I think I need a little more explanation. This is what John gave him. They're brine shrimp. So small you can barely see them, even when they're full grown. You pour the brine shrimp eggs in some water, along with a little food, and in a couple of days you got your sea monkeys swimming around. Feed them once a week, and they last for a couple of months. Petey called them space monkeys. Well, yeah, the eggs are good for experiments, so they took some on a few Apollo flights. Let them get brizzled by cosmic rays to see what happened. They aren't radioactive or anything. No, nothing like that. The scientists hatched a bunch of them when they got back to Earth. They turned out just regular old brine shrimp. Maybe an extra set of legs or two. So John got permission to give a few batches of the unhatched eggs to kids. Calls them space monkeys. Because he's John. What was I supposed to do? Suzanne sat down on the bed next to her ex-husband. I know you have a hard time saying no. They last a couple of months, that's it? If you're lucky. Once they're gone, you can throw out the aquarium. Better yet, get the kid a goldfish. Suzanne looked at the aquarium sitting on the dresser. She tried not to imagine a badly thrown baseball crashing through the glass and water cascading over Petey's clothes. All right. He did get them from a real live astronaut. Let's give Boyo the good news. They made a deal. The space monkeys were Petey and Gerald's project. If Petey had an issue that didn't involve a waterfall in his room, he called his dad. If I have to deal with your space monkeys, they go to your dad's on his next weekend. And for the most part, Petey's word was his bond. Once he complained he couldn't find his space monkey food, but quickly followed up with, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of it." There was also a tense 30 minutes when Petey ran back and forth from his room to their backyard, carrying a large plastic cup. Suzanne took a peek in his room. No broken glass or soaked carpet. She went back to folding clothes and threw out a casual, "Everything okay, champ?" on Petey's next slap. "You watching out for alligators?" There was a small stream just past their lawn that turned the backyard swampy on the rare occasions it rained. Watch out for gators was a family joke. This time, Petey didn't crack a smile. He just frowned into the cup for a moment. "There's not really any alligators outside. Right, Mom?" "No, sweetie. Not enough water." "Okay, then everything's fine." By the time Gerald's weekend came around again, Suzanne had to admit the space monkeys weren't a problem after all. She'd arranged for Gerald to pick Petey up from Hank's dog shop, Petey's favorite watering hole. The 8-year-old had already polished off a chili dog and was halfway through his strawberry milkshake. "Don't eat too much. You might get sick in your dad's convertible." Suzanne reconsidered. "Eat as much as you like." It was nice to be the one spoiling Petey for a change. The boy took a deep slurp of milkshake and sighed with satisfaction. "Mom, can you do me a favor? It's about Rudy, my space monkey. I know you don't want to take care of him, but I'll be at Dad's and—" "You've done a great job with them. Wait, there's only one?" "Yeah, but he's doing really good." They must be dying off even quicker than Gerald said. Suzanne almost felt guilty. Maybe she would get Petey that goldfish. What do you need? "He's fed and everything, but could you just check on him? Make sure he's okay?" "Of course, sweetheart." "And I won't have to take him to Dad's for that?" "No, I'm happy to do it." With Petey safely on his way to the Cape, Suzanne took her time driving home. Her neighbor Harry was out watering his grass next door. When Suzanne pulled in, he waved her over. "So, is this Petey's weekend with Gerald?" Harry was in his late 40s and had a penchant for beachcomber-style straw hats and keeping his ever-present Hawaiian shirts unbuttoned down to his pot belly. Despite his fashion sense, Harry was a good neighbor, always ready to lend a hand or loan out a tool or two. "Yep, got the place to myself. Just me and Rudy, the lone space monkey." "Well, we're having a few friends over later, if you get bored and want something to do. Eugenia's always saying we should have you over for a drink." "Sweet of you to offer, Harry. I think I'll probably just bask in the solitude tonight. But if I change my mind, I'll give you a call." "I'll tell Eugenia you're a firm maybe," said Harry and gave her an exaggerated wink. 2 hours later, Suzanne didn't feel like partying with her neighbors, but she decided a drink was a fine idea and maybe some Chinese delivery. She opened a bottle of Chardonnay when the food arrived. White wine goes with fried rice, right? She woke up snug in her bed with dim memories of corking the half-empty Chard and putting the leftover Chinese food in the fridge. You sure know how to party. Thoughts of coffee and some aspirin were enough to get her out of bed. Oh, and don't forget your space monkey sitting. Better take a peek in Petey's room. The carpet outside Pete's half-open door squelched under Suzanne's bare feet. Oh, no. And things had been going so well. Sure enough, the side panel of the aquarium was shattered, and water covered both the dresser and floor. What the hell could have happened? Petey's at the Cape. And a few glasses of wine do not send me into an aquarium smashing frenzy. She didn't see a brine shrimp flopping on the carpet. Gerald said they were tiny. Well, time for towels and a pair of shoes. Suzanne didn't feel like bleeding this morning. A crash sounded in the kitchen. Oh, what now? Could an animal have gotten in? A cat, maybe. Watch out for gators. But the family joke didn't sound so funny just now. A cat, she said in her no-nonsense teacher's voice, or maybe a possum. It wasn't a possum or even an alligator. The door to the refrigerator hung open. The thing inside was about 3 feet long. Sickly green horizontal bands covered the length of the creature. The bands looked hard, like tortoise shell polished to a glimmering sheen. At least a dozen legs poked out from the thing's sides. Each limb looked meaty and muscular and ended in 3 long talon-tipped digits. Oh, Jesus! The house was locked up, windows closed. Nothing that big could have gotten inside. Suzanne thought she knew what broke the aquarium. There's only one, Petey had said, but he's doing really well. Rudy, her son's last remaining space monkey, pulled its, what? Head section? From the plastic drawer. The smell of leftover fried rice and Oscar Mayer bologna filled the room. 2 long antennae, arms, mandibles, locked onto a half-full gallon of milk and pulled the jug to the thing's head. The space monkey made a sound like Petey finishing off his strawberry milkshake. The jug imploded. Rudy's body gave a full-length shudder and grew, broadening and lengthening by a good 4 inches. A blue ooze flowed out from between the bands of shell. The ooze coated the freshly grown flesh, hardening into new layers of protection. Suzanne took a cautious step backward, angling for the front door. She held her breath, but the space monkey somehow sensed her. Rudy's head section rotated on its body. A long segmented tube extended tentatively in Suzanne's direction. The lip of the tube was red and wet. Black triangular teeth pushed through the red flesh and came together with an almost musical clink. The space monkey's body spun, its many legs breaking into a galloping scurry toward Suzanne. She turned and ran flat out for the door. She made it 3 steps before her foot came down on the Mattel lunar lander model Gerald and Petey had put together 3 months before. Suzanne cursed and fell hard on her shoulder. The fall saved her life. Rudy was practically airborne when it ran right over her. A few claws tried to gain purchase, but they only snagged for a moment on her terry cloth robe as the creature passed over. The space monkey rammed the flowered wallpaper with a thud. Its mouth tube brayed a sound that was half bellow, half kazoo. Suzanne let out an involuntary bark of hysterical laughter. She kept seeing the milk jug collapsing in on itself as Rudy sucked out the contents. Fear gave Suzanne speed and the fortitude to ignore the pain in her shoulder. She rolled to her feet and dashed to the door, slamming it behind her before the space monkey gave chase. A jolt of panic ripped through her as she realized she hadn't pressed the button on the knob so it would lock when closed. Maybe it wouldn't matter. Could the thing turn a doorknob? As if in answer, the door bulged outward as something strong and pissed off slammed against it. Suzanne looked around the neighborhood. No one was stirring yet on this quiet Saturday morning. "I have to get to a phone." Another thud shook the door. Suzanne stopped trying to plan and ran for Harry and Eugenia's seafoam green bungalow. Suzanne's front door gave way with a crash. Rudy let out another of its strange kazoo-colored bellows. Suzanne didn't look back. She didn't want to see the black teeth of the space monkey's mouth tube snapping open and closed. Her hand reached Harry and Eugenia's doorknob. Not locked. Thank God it's not locked. Suzanne pushed inside, then slammed and locked the door. She stared at the white wood, waiting for the thud. "Well, Suzanne, I know Harry invited you to come by, but you really should have called first, or at least knocked." Suzanne turned to her neighbor. "I'm so sorry. We have to call the police. Suzanne would not have believed it possible, but for the moment she had completely forgotten why she came over. Eugenia Price, Suzanne's neighbor for the last 5 years, and vice president of the Cadero County Historical Society, stood naked in her living room but for a complex arrangement of black leather straps that supported the foot-long, bright red phallus protruding at a jaunty angle from about crotch level. "Now hold on, Suzanne. There is no need to call any police. We're all consenting adults here." Eugenia gestured to a naked man sound asleep on the flower-print sofa. "It's just a lifestyle choice. Nobody's getting hurt." The door burst inward with a bang and a shower of splintered wood. The space monkey reared up its top half, mouth tube thrust forward, as if tasting the air. Eugenia screamed and ran through a beaded door curtain into the dining room. "Harry!" Suzanne spotted a black club on the floor and snatched it up. It wasn't a club, but it was the closest thing to a weapon in the room. The space monkey ignored Suzanne and Eugenia. The naked man, now sitting up and blinking dazedly, was not so lucky. Rudy's multiple legs flexed, and he leaped across the room. The man never even screamed. The space monkey's fanged mouth tube plunged into his narrow chest, while dozens of legs held him immobile. Blood bubbled from the man's open mouth, then reversed course as the space monkey sucked in its meal. "Get down, Suzanne!" A rapid series of explosions filled the room. Suzanne dove to the floor. Harry and Eugenia stood in the door to the dining room. Harry wore his signature beachcomber straw hat, along with a rhinestone-studded codpiece and nipple clips. He held a pistol in each hand. Eugenia held a rifle pressed into her shoulder. Bullets struck the space monkey shell, ricocheting away with shrill whistling sounds. "Get out, Suze!" yelled Harry over the cacophony. "We got this!" Suzanne wasn't too sure about that. The space monkey rocked under the onslaught of bullets. But even where a stray shot got past its shell armor, blue ooze bubbled out of the wound, sealing it. The crawl toward the front door seemed to take hours. Any moment, Suzanne expected to feel Rudy's mouth tube plunged into her back. Harry and Eugenia were still firing as Suzanne crossed the threshold. Where did they keep the extra rounds? A dry click sounded as Suzanne stood and pulled the door, still hanging by one hinge, as close to closed as she could manage. A few more sporadic shots sounded, and then the house was silent. Suzanne stood in the cul-de-sac praying that her gun-toting swinger neighbors had killed Petey's pet. She didn't even notice the 2 police cruisers until they'd stopped their engines and one of the policemen yelled to her. "Ma'am, put down the object." The man speaking was tall and thin, his face dominated by a bushy mustache. The other officer, shorter, with broad shoulders, stood in the open door of the second cruiser. He had his gun drawn, but he was laughing too hard to point it anywhere. "Shut up, Hawkins!" yelled Mustache. "Ma'am, put down the thing in your hand and approach me slowly." Suzanne dropped the 2-foot-long black dildo onto the asphalt. She hadn't even realized she still held it. "Harry and Eugenia." Suzanne pointed to her neighbor's house. "I think they're dead." "No, they killed the monster. They shot it to death, and Eugenia is probably having sex with it now. Please, Lord, let that be the way it happened." "We had reports of shots being fired." Mustache was talking again. It took a little while for the words to make sense to Suzanne. "I think I'm in shock." "Are you hurt, ma'am?" "No." Suzanne didn't know if she said the word out loud. "I should be the one hurt, not Harry and Eugenia. It was my monster. I could have stopped it." She imagined Petey watching as his space monkey grew. He would have told me about it, would have asked me for help. Is it supposed to get so big, Mummy? But I had to make him take some responsibility because my ex-husband pissed me off. Now people are dead. What if Petey had been home? Suzanne let loose an involuntary groan. "Ma'am, I need you to talk to me. Did you call the police?" Suzanne looked back to Mustache Cop, then to Harry and Eugenia's door hanging from its single hinge. Harry had guns, but I don't think it helped. "Who has guns?" Suzanne took a deep breath. "Harry, my neighbor." She pointed to the bungalow. "All right. I want you to go to my cruiser. We're going to take care of this." Harry and Eugenia's broken front door pushed open almost languidly, as if the creature coming out had nothing to fear. "What the hell is that?" Rudy was now the size of a cow, maybe a hippo. How big is a freaking hippo? Suzanne shook her head hard. Get it together, Suze. Hawkins, the wide-bodied cop, stood between the 2 cruisers, his pistol in a 2-handed shooter's grip. Bullets struck the enormous space monkey, pinging off in random trajectories. Suzanne had been here before. She ducked her head and ran. Mustache Cop added more bullets to the party. Suzanne yelled, "It won't help! Get back in your cars! Drive!" Maybe it was the bullets bouncing off the space monkey's shell, but Mustache Cop stopped firing. Suzanne could hear his feet striking the asphalt as he ran after her. Shots still rang out from the second policeman's gun. Suzanne reached the cruiser and threw herself into the front seat. She saw Mustache Cop in mid-stride, reaching out as if Suzanne could somehow pull him to safety. The space monkey's mouth tube burst through the man's chest. Blood and bones sprayed the cruiser's windshield. Hawkins screamed and kept firing. Suzanne screamed herself, just to cut through the panic filling her head. It helped. She pulled the cruiser door shut. Keys hung from the ignition. In front of her, the space monkey finished up with Mustache Cop. Another person who tried to help her, dead. Suzanne started the cruiser. This had to end. She never wanted to be the monster bitch, but it was time. She shifted into drive and stood on the gas. The cruiser leaped forward with a shriek of tires chewing asphalt. But the only thing to go down beneath its wheels was the dead police officer. Rudy's first leap carried it to the hood of the cruiser. Its second sent it over the car altogether. Hawkins had replaced his empty pistol with a shotgun. He got one shot off before the space monkey landed in front of him, stretched to its full height, and rammed its mouth tube straight down through the top of the man's skull. Suzanne watched through the cruiser's rear view as the space monkey grew. No! She shifted into reverse and punched the gas again. Maybe the space monkey tried to jump, but the mouth tube was lodged too deep. That didn't matter. What mattered was the sound of shells cracking as the cruiser's rear fender pinned the space monkey against the other police car at 20 miles per hour. Blue goo gouted from the thing's wounds. It poured over the twisted metal of the cruisers, cementing monster and machine into a solid, immovable mass. Suzanne picked up the shotgun, slick with Hawkins' blood. She'd never fired one, but figured it out. The first squeeze of the trigger blew Rudy's mouth tube into fragments. Suzanne racked the slide and shoved the shotgun barrel in the crater the first shell had left. She pulled the trigger again and again, shoving deeper into the space monkey's soft insides with each shot. God damn you to hell, John Glenn! The sixth time Suzanne racked the slide and fired, the space monkey stopped moving. She pulled the shotgun from inside the carcass. Blue ooze stiffened and cracked on her forearms. The pieces fell to the asphalt. Once she got past her missing front door, the house seemed strangely undisturbed. Suzanne picked up the phone and pressed it to her ear. The number she dialed was not the police. More of them were probably on the way. Instead, Suzanne called a 2-bedroom condo in Cape Canaveral. "Hello, Glenshaw residence." Petey's high voice articulated each word carefully. The sound of her son's voice sent a thrill of fierce joy through Suzanne. Petey was safe in Cape Canaveral with Gerald. And I killed the goddamned monster. "Hey, sweetheart. Are you having a good time?" Suzanne's voice only cracked a little, but Petey noticed. "You okay, Mom?" Suzanne wiped tears from her eyes. "Yeah, Mommy just misses you, kiddo." "I miss you too, Mom. Is Rudy okay?" The silence on the phone stretched as Suzanne thought about her answer. "Mom, I don't mind. I mean, if he's not okay. I don't like him much. He ate up his brothers and sisters." Suzanne nodded silently. "Of course he did." "I saved the ones I could, but he ate most of them." "What?" An ice-cold void opened in Suzanne's gut. "Daddy says sometimes fishes do that." "Honey, what do you mean you saved them?" She replayed the memory of Petey running back and forth from his room to the backyard, a large red plastic cup clutched in his small hands. "I put them in the stream. I was careful, Mom. I didn't get wet or anything. And no gators." Suzanne wondered how many space monkeys Petey had saved. How many had been outside eating and growing for over a week. "Petey, guess what? You're going to stay with Daddy a few more days." Distant sirens grew nearer. "Tell your dad I'll call him soon." The phone felt suddenly heavy and awkward in her hand. It took Suzanne 3 tries to get it on the cradle. She pulled her torn and stained terry cloth robe tighter, though the day was already heating up. The police would be here soon with more shotguns. While she waited, Suzanne watched the backyard and prayed for alligators.
That was Frank Oreto's God Damn You to Hell, John Glenn, as read by Nikolle Doolin. Nikolle is a writer and voice actor. She performs for a number of popular and award-winning podcasts, such as the No Sleep Podcast, Far-Fetched Fables, and Tales to Terrify. To learn more about Nikolle, visit her website at nikolledoolin.com. Thank you, Nikolle. Well, children of the night, the hour is late and we've run out of tales to tell. For now. Tales to Terrify is made possible by the tremendous generosity of our supporters on Patreon and PayPal. Incredible fans like Lestle Baxter, Amanda Carrillo, Amanda Gottfried, and Orion D. Hegre, whose generous support keeps these lights on and flickering ominously. If you're not a supporter, head over to patreon.com/Tales to Terrify. You'll find all kinds of perks, like ad-free episodes, bonus content, and one-of-a-kind collectibles. Every dollar goes back into this show, and we appreciate your support so much. Want another way to support the show that doesn't cost you a cent? Head over to Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and drop us a 5-star review. You'll not only put an unnaturally wide smile on our faces, but help new listeners discover our terrifying tales too. You can show your love of the show out in the world with some Tales to Terrify merch. TalesToTerrify.com/merch will take you to our TeePublic store, where we've got a great collection of creepy custom and curated designs. Tales to Terrify is produced by Seth Williams, Meredith Morgenstern, Andrew Gibson, Crystal Hammond, Spencer Disparty, and myself, Drew Sebastini, with original theme by Nebulous Entertainment. Tales to Terrify is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Join us again next week as we devour our frustrations with more Tales to Terrify.